Hello, Collectivites. This is Acoustic speaking, presenting to you the Wanderstar Report, the internet show all about Collective, the community-created card game. On today's episode of the Wanderstar Report, we see the beginning of new standards versus true archetypes. We show off some of the first submissions for Collective's third card back competition, and we look at the other top deck that's been terrorizing the metagame at large. Now that I've established what's to come, let's get the show rolling. So without further ado, let's dive in to the week review. Starting off the new week, Blue Moon Rutsuki acts as the beginning of Ninja's existence as an archetype, or at least as a package. Being able to give one of your ninjas unblockable for a turn seems quite strong on paper, allowing for some free face damage, along with being an easy way to proc your ninja's effects. However, currently there will only be two other ninjas when this rotates in. Kunai Trainee, who has no implicit synergy with the unblockable effect, and Smoke Step Oni from last week, who just kind of sucks without the unblockable. For the time being, Rutsuki probably isn't doing too much, but it definitely has a chance to pop off if the community prints more good ninjas. Keep an eye out for this one. Combat Encounter looks like it'll be a strength staple for quite some time. Getting 6 mana worth of stats for the price of 5 is a very good deal, and the nature of the effect also creates some nice, if minor, deck thinning for the late game. Honestly, the main balancing factor on this is the fact that it doesn't force play the units, merely putting them into play, meaning a lot of good early drops with strong summons aren't great with this. Though, this downside can also be used to bring out overcurve units with downside summons, such as Scraggy Imp from last week. The random factor also adds a slight deck building cost if you want to avoid too many whiffs. Overall, this card looks really strong and could allow for more mid-range focused strategies and strength to shine. Now, I already talked about Lumia last week, so I'll try not to repeat myself. Lumia acts as a form of card filtering that lets you generally have more options on what to play on a turn-by-turn basis by re-rolling cards you draw that you can't play. This could give it some use in control decks who want to have their control tools in their early game rather than the top ends they can't play until later on. I can also see Lumia helping out ramp game plans, providing some additional consistency for drawing your ramp cards. Truth be told, this just seems like an effect lots of decks would like, so I imagine there will be lots of experimentation to figure out if this card is worth it. Regardless of the answer, I'm glad this card got in, and that it's making us ask these sorts of questions in the first place. Ferrog Waste's Warden is honestly a bit underwhelming for a retrain. By the time this drops onto the board, most units are going to have at least 3 attack, and Bullock's board of tokens will get a boost from his level 3, pushing them out of the range of Ferrog's effect for the first turn. For a 9 mana unit, this has very low impact until it lasts for a couple of turns. At least Ward and 12 HP makes it very hard to kill for what that's worth. In the card's current state, it could absolutely cost 8 and still probably not be that amazing. Revealing True Essence is one of the first cards for Hollows, a Spirit Affinity self-sack archetype, and it's a strong card at that. Against enemies, it's a decent enough removal, letting you kill a 1 HP unit to get a 2/2 out of it. However, its best use is as a way to upgrade your smaller units or tokens into 4/4 worth of stats. This card looks great in both Bullock and Marie, and works well as a curve play after 1 drops such as Giddy Gardener and Bygone Thought. Revealing's ability to upgrade your tokens or proc entombs for cheap while getting more stats than what you put into it will make it a powerful tool in many spirit decks to come. Talira Soldier, not to be confused with Talira Soldiers, is a pretty solid generic duelist, along with setting the groundwork for a possible active focused deck. Since the game considers duelist to be an active, this actually buffs itself each time it duels. This self-scaling factor makes it really good if you can buff its health, and actually works well with Trekt from last week due to the regen granting. Not much to say about this one. It's a good duelist for most decks, and could inspire other good active designs. Surging Blade Spirit is a solid card that should prove useful in boosting many kinds of deck strategies in mind. At base, a 3 mana 2/3 that draws an action isn't too bad on curve. However, a deck that can consistently activate the Spirit's effect will have access to a vanilla that cantrips, although that does require all your actions to be very low cost. This can also be used to tutor 1 or 2 specific actions in an action light deck, or even work as a curve play if all actions in your deck cost 0. Overall, it's an interesting card to be sure, and I think you'll find a home in a good variety of mind decks, or even make some new ones. Hostile Examiner is an interesting card to say the least. The card evokes similar vibes to Lord of Ideas, with it creating a token action while also boosting the token's effects if the unit is on the field when you play it. Ideally, you want cards that will let you draw the fossils directly from your deck. In an otherwise actionless deck, this includes Dunewalker Scout and this week's Surging Blade Spirit. The card definitely has the potential to net you insane amounts of card advantage if you build your deck right, though it remains to be seen if molding your deck to accommodate this will be worth it. Hollow Weaver is another of the new Hollow cards, and is rather strong like the other one from this week. It seems good for similar reasons to Revealing True Essence, with it being able to upgrade any tokens you make and or proc powerful Entomb effects, both 1/2 deadly attached. And a 1/2 deadly is a pretty nice body. To be honest, most of the praises I could sing about this card are ones I've already said about Revealing. I think both are going to be Bullock and Marie staples for the foreseeable future, even if they end up being the only 2 Hollow cards that ever get in. Mountain Guide scares me. For all intents and purposes, this is just a variant of Rosecourt Courier in Spirit, a card that was incredibly powerful in the context of a much higher power level than our current one. One could even argue that the draw and discount effect is actually even stronger than what Courier could accomplish due to the ability to use the card's summon, along with the ability to save the unit for a later turn. There's also the part where this doesn't make you take 5 damage, which is very relevant. The one thing that might make this card resemble Balance is that you don't choose what card you draw, preventing you from using it as a toolbox, along with adding somewhat of a deck building restriction if you want to tutor a specific unit with this. I'm just a bit worried about having a card like this so early into the new rotation, but maybe I'm just overreacting? Oh look, another Strength Rage unit designed almost exclusively to dunk on token decks. And this one comes down even earlier. My guess is this does a very similar thing to Slag Slammer, albeit at a cheaper cost and only 2 for 1-ing instead of 4 for 1-ing. However, unlike Slammer, this has Endure 1, allowing it to infinitely block 1/1s unless you hit it with a Deface. Now, its smaller body does open up more answers to it compared to Slammer, but its lower cost demands answers much earlier, which could be even more troublesome depending on the opponent's draws. I get people are tired of getting trounced by the big cat, but I don't think making these play to win the Bullock matchup cards are the way to healthily shift the metagame. Finally, we end on Cursed Demon's Blade, a simple buff action. 2 mana for +2/+2 is relatively unremarkable at base, but its improved state after reaching 15 health or below does give a handy duelist buff. The additional overrun granting is okay, but it's not the reason to play the card in my opinion. The condition might make it a bit clunky to use, at least without the use of various self-damage cards. It also sort of has anti-synergy with the other card that cares about having 15 or less health, Chaotic Hellhound, since that one acts as a way to escape the threshold while this wants you to stay inside of it. I have a gut feeling this might be more trouble than it's worth. Overall, I'd say this was a pretty strong week. We can see the beginning of some archetypes like ninjas and hollows, along with some good general use cards. Cards like Fossil Examiner and Surging Blade Spirit also look to provide interesting deck building opportunities, although unfortunately I can't say I like all the cards from this week, and I'm afraid of the impact Scorpling and Mountain Guide will have on the metagame. I also wish Ferrog's Waste Warden had a bit more teeth, since right now it feels underwhelming compared to his older self. Even in spite of these gripes, I do consider this week an improvement over the last one. Let's see if next week can provide us some more quality cards by looking at the collective subreddit, past and present. Starting with this week, we have Malabogia Smith, another in a line of early drops with effects that scale into the late game. Without the condition, a 1-mana 2/1 that lets you slightly rig your next draw can prove incredibly useful in the early game for preventing breaks. Of course, with the condition, the rake becomes a cantrip, which becomes incredibly strong for a 1-mana unit. From the looks of it, with both this and the Cursed Demon's Blade, Spikebird might be trying to push a 15 or less health archetype, and honestly, I'm all for it. Next, we have Needle Knight, a rather curious rage unit. For 3 mana, its body is pathetically weak, but sports a rage effect with an incredibly high power ceiling. Depending on how you build your deck, this can do massive amounts of damage for cheap, but actually setting up conditions to make the card work is quite clunky, especially in strength. Truth be told, this card feels like it's in the wrong affinity, and I also think the power of the effect is cutting too hard into the card's stat line. Perhaps flat damage would make the card less scary to voters, and would let you push the stat line a bit. And lastly for this week, we have Tempt, a different kind of early game removal option. The steal effect means this is able to both remove an enemy attacker, while also creating a blocker for yourself, at least until the end of the turn. This card is at its best when you can create scenarios that allow you to kill the unit you just stole, while also getting rid of one of the opponent's other units, killing 2 birds with 1 stone. Against some players, depending on what you steal, they might even be encouraged to not attack at all, or risk losing a unit they care about. I definitely think mind control decks are going to love this. Now looking at the previous week, we have Utopian Dream, one of the wackiest cards seen posted for the new standard. This card pretty much tells you to escape your turn 1, and in return grants you a Diet Perlma passive, letting you draw some additional cards throughout the game by holding mana. This can be useful for control decks that want to play a reactive game plan, waiting for the opponent to make a move, since if they pass when you do, you can net some free cards. However, the cost of the card itself, and I mean this literally, does make you start the game further behind than you would normally as a control deck, which can polarize some of your faster matchups. I can understand why people wouldn't want a card as potentially game warping as this. Personally, I agree that now's probably not the time for Utopian Dream, but I would be happy to see a repost in a couple of months. Von Basil PhD is the first legendary card posted for the new rotation with a potent effect to boot. This version of Basil lets you blow up one of your non-plants to put a copy of it on top of your deck with double the stats, which can synergize well with big duelists or general stat sticks, like Relentless Gemhide. However, the strongest part of the card isn't the superpowered copy, nor is it Basil's respectable body for blocking purposes, but in fact the immense amount of life gain this can give you. The HP gained is effectively equal to twice the base HP of whatever you sacrifice, which will usually be somewhere from 8 to 12 HP, if not more. And since Basil's rebound, they can do this twice. That amount of life gain could make it way too easy for spirit decks to stabilize against any deck that doesn't plan on just outgrinding them. Personally, I think the life gain effect should be cut in half and then balanced accordingly. This is a cool design, and I think the immense heal is currently overshadowing the best parts of it at the moment. Finally, we have Noko Noko the Wise, certainly one of the designs of all time. This is supposed to be snake support by letting you turn snakes into a draw engine. However, the fact this requires you to play snakes rather than really creating them is very awkward, considering almost all of the cards in current standard that involve snakes don't even work with this. Either that or it's something like Constricting Serpent, which I don't want to run in any deck, even with this. Also, the 1/1 stat line on the main body means this rarely lasts longer than a pass or two. I would suggest a rework, starting by having Noko Noko trigger off of creating snakes rather than playing them, along with buffing the main body so it doesn't die to a light breeze, and probably reducing the number of holy serpents it makes for balance reasons. Right now, the design feels confused, and could use some of the aforementioned changes, in my opinion. By looking at both this week and last week, I can see a mix of generic staples along with more experimental designs. Cards like Malvogia Smith and Tempt try to keep things simple and attempt to fill in otherwise overlooked niches in our card pool. And then on the other hand, you have stuff like Utopian Dream and Noko Noko the Wise, which are certainly creative, even if they may have a few problems. I could definitely see some designers are willing to toe the line with what kind of designs are acceptable in this new age of collective. But I think we've talked about cards enough for one day, so let's talk about other collective creations and events in the Collective Showcase. Before I get into the new threat that's taking the metagame by storm, let's have a look at some cardback submissions for the third collective cardback competition. These 4 cardbacks are not all the current submissions, simply some of the ones that, as far as I know, are completely finished. And of these 4, we have Sovereign Song, Elemancer, The World in Its Clutches, and Dream Unconfinement, all made by JTAD. Sovereign Song is a concerto-themed cardback designed after Melody, god of music and the realm's major deity. The bright color scheme serves as a nice contrast to the otherwise pretty dark or dull colors of our current card pool selection, and the gold accents allow the other colors to really pop. The piano at the bottom is also a nice touch to keep the music theme, which is otherwise a bit hard to notice. Honestly, I think we've needed something like this for a long time. Elemancers, themed after Talira, or more specifically, Jammy the Elemancer. The red gems, in combination with the top of the tower, serve to resemble Jammy's crown and hair, which I think is quite creative. The fire rune in the center works well as a point of interest, where there otherwise wouldn't be much. However, I think the circular plate of metal in the center of the cardback feels a bit out of place, perhaps making it a bit more rectangular would work better, but that's just my opinion. The World in Its Clutches is another Talira-themed card back, this time based on the all-powerful Titan Kadar. If I could describe this card back in one word, it would be epic. The border is engraved with the symbols of the various kinds of Talirian magic, evoking immense magical power. This is topped off with the image of Kadar grasping the world Talira in the center, a display of the being's presence over the realm. Overall, this appeals to the part of the brain that likes seeing a cool, powerful guy doing cool, powerful things, and I'm all for it. If you want to see your deck list appear on the Wanderstar report, be sure to post it on Sevas' deck building site, as that's where I check each week for new and exciting deck lists to cover on the show. Now let's talk about Prince Cat's Marie Control. The deck is sort of a good stuff pile, with a mix of strong standalone units and powerful forms of interaction. The deck's early game is focused on accelerating to your level 2 as fast as possible, since the hero active it gives you nets you an insane amount of card filtering, letting you draw more cards while discarding other cards you don't need. In combination with Marie's level 3, she could turn the card filtering into straight up card advantage, allowing her to have more cards to play with than almost any other deck. The deck also runs Cloud of Data to extend its plays while allowing you to use Marie's active multiple times per turn. Marie aims to deprive the enemy of its resources, using cards like Data Disruption to rip cards from their hand, and High Prosecutor Dallin to get rid of their strongest units, which the Marie player can then play themselves using cards like Lesser Raised Dead. This deck is currently not only performing well against a large variety of the metagame, it is also the premier counter to Bullock aggro, and looking at the next 2 weeks rotating in, it's only going to get better. Something tells me that very soon, this will become the definitive deck to beat, or possibly even become tier 0, assuming multiple cards from the deck or Marie herself don't get a direct nerf. And that marks the end of today's episode of the Wanderstar Report. Thank you all for watching, and I hope you enjoyed the episode. If you have any feedback, please leave a comment. I'd love to hear what the people think so I can improve my content for you, the viewer. In the description, you can find many helpful links related to Collective, including where to get the game and how to learn more about it. I look forward to seeing you all next week. This is Acoustic, signing off.